The streets of Washington, D.C. had learned a new stillness. Not the quiet of safety, but the kind that came from checkpoints every 3 blocks, and helicopters circling low enough to rattle windows. Curfew had been in effect for 72 hours. The news called it restoration of order. The people trapped in their apartments called it something else. President Calhoun's face filled every screen, his jaw set in the expression focus groups had determined looked both resolute and compassionate. He spoke about security, about necessary measures, about how Americans could sleep soundly, knowing their protectors were watching. Then Homelander leaned into frame. The president's speech stumbled, recovered. Homelander's smile never wavered as he placed one gloved hand on Calhoun's shoulder, the gestures somewhere between comradely and possessive. The blue suit caught studio lights like a flag no one could look away from. When he spoke, his voice carried that perfect blend of warmth and warning that made people uncertain whether they should applaud or run. What President Calhoun means, Homelander said, still smiling, is that enemies of America will face justice. Real justice, not the kind that hides behind lawyers and technicalities. His eyes found the camera with practiced ease. The kind that comes from people who actually give a damn about this country. The chyron beneath them read, Martial Law. Day 3, security restored. 3 miles from the White House, on a street corner where protesters had been beaten unconscious 48 hours prior, the pavement began to hum. The sound started low, subsonic, the kind of vibration that made teeth ache before ears registered anything wrong. 2 National Guard soldiers manning a checkpoint looked at each other, then down at their boots. The asphalt beneath them rippled like water disturbed by something rising from below. Control we have. The street split. Not cleanly, not like construction equipment or a sinkhole. The concrete simply peeled back from itself, layers of road surface folding upward as if gravity had filed for divorce. Rebar screamed. Underground pipes burst with pressure they were never meant to contain. Steam geysered into the cold January air. The rift measured roughly 8 feet tall and 3 feet wide. Its edges gleamed with a light that had no business existing in this spectrum, a color that made the soldiers' helmet cameras flicker and die. Through the gap, nothing was visible. Not darkness, not light. Just an absence that the human brain kept trying and failing to process. Then she stepped through. Small. That was the first thing anyone noticed, the detail their training manuals had never prepared them for. The figure emerging from the rift stood maybe 5 feet tall, green hair drifting in a wind that only touched her. The black dress she wore seemed impractical for combat for winter, for anything except making a statement about not giving a damn what anyone thought. Her eyes swept the checkpoint with the expression of someone cataloging insects. Freeze. The soldier's voice cracked on the second syllable. Hands where I can see them. On the ground now. Tatsumaki tilted her head slightly, the way a person might acknowledge a fly buzzing near their ear. She didn't raise her hands. Didn't get on the ground. Didn't acknowledge the rifles now trained on her from 3 different positions. The armored vehicle, a mine-resistant ambush-protected truck weighing 14 tons, began to rise. It happened without drama. No grinding of metal, no explosive force, no visible means of propulsion. The truck simply stopped obeying the fundamental rules it had been built around. Its tires spun uselessly as it climbed into the air, slow and steady as an elevator. 20 feet up. 30. The soldiers inside screamed into their radios, voices pitching toward panic as their world rotated 90 degrees and kept going. Tatsumaki held it there, suspended, while she walked past the checkpoint like someone passing scaffolding on a sidewalk. The first shots came from the perimeter team. Standard procedure center mass, the same muscle memory that had earned them their deployment. The bullets traveled exactly as far as ballistics predicted, right up until they didn't. 3 feet from her body, the round slowed. Stopped. Hung in the air like insects trapped in amber. She glanced at them with something that might have been irritation. The bullets reversed course. They didn't ricochet. That would have been physics. This was intention made manifest, each round returning along its exact trajectory at twice the velocity it had arrived. The concrete barriers behind the soldiers developed fresh holes. The soldiers themselves had already hit the ground survival instinct, overriding training. Tatsumaki kept walking. Behind her, the MRAP settled back to Earth with a crunch of compressed suspension. The soldiers inside would need trauma counseling. The ones on the ground would need new shorts. None of them would need body bags, which meant she'd been gentle. Overhead, the drone swarm arrived. Vaught's latest contribution to domestic security, each unit worth more than the average American made in a year. 43 drones coordinated by AI that had been trained on every meta-human engagement in the past decade. They came in fast from multiple angles, weapons hot. Tatsumaki stopped walking, looked up, sighed. The drones crumpled. Not exploded, not shot down, just compressed as if an invisible fist had closed around each one simultaneously and squeezed. Metal folded into metal circuitry merged with casing rotors tangled with their own frames. What had been a tactical response became a rain of compacted scrap, each piece roughly the size and shape of a softball. They fell around her in a neat circle, bouncing off the pavement, with sounds like a failed percussion concert. She didn't flinch, didn't look at them again, just resumed walking toward the heart of the city as if nothing worth noting had occurred. At Vought Tower, someone's hands were already flying across a keyboard. The footage would be everywhere within 10 minutes, carefully edited. The armored vehicle rising would become Masa, unprovoked attack on security forces. The returned bullets would be cut entirely. The drone swarm's destruction would be framed as extreme force against non-lethal surveillance. The Chiron would read Alien Invader Attacks Checkpoint. By the time Tatsumaki reached Constitution Avenue, the narrative was already being written. Not by witnesses, not by facts, by people who understood that the first version of a story was the only one that mattered, and truth was just another asset to be managed. 3 blocks east, a deputized superhero team was suiting up for the cameras. They'd been briefed on the target hostile meta-human origin, unknown extreme threat level. Their scripts were already prepared, sound bites about defending American lives and upholding the values that made the nation great. None of them had been told they were about to meet something that didn't care about scripts. The street she walked grew quieter with each step. Not because people ran, because they recognized on some level deeper than conscious thought that this was not a fight. This was weather. You didn't argue with hurricanes. You found shelter and prayed the foundation held. Behind her, the rift remained open. Its edges flickered with that wrong color light, a wound in reality that Vaught's best minds were already trying to explain away as a hoax, a deepfake, a false flag operation by domestic terrorists. In a bunker beneath the city, Sage watched 7 different camera feeds simultaneously. Her eyes tracked the figure moving through Washington streets with the calm of someone watching a predicted outcome. She'd run the numbers on this scenario 83 times in the past month, ever since the black site energy readings had started spiking. The math had been clear. Open a door and something would walk through it. The question had never been if. only when and whether they could control the narrative better than they could control the variable. She picked up a phone. "Get me Homelander. Tell him we have his alien invasion." On Constitution Avenue, Tatsumaki stopped in the middle of an intersection, looked around at the empty streets, the shuttered buildings, the checkpoints visible in the distance. Her expression didn't change. She'd seen occupied cities before. This one just pretended it wasn't. She took a breath, and the windows 3 blocks in every direction rattled in their frames. Not breaking. Just reminding everything in range that the rules had changed and nobody had asked permission. The first response team rounded the corner 30 seconds later, body armor gleaming for the cameras that trailed behind them. 5 heroes deputized under emergency powers, each one a licensed product with merchandising deals and Twitter verification. They saw a small figure in Tetsu in a black dress standing alone. They thought they were seeing prey. Tatsumaki looked at them the way someone might look at ants crawling toward a boot, and smiled. Bro. Chapter 1 is funny as hell, because it's basically a max-level character spawning into the tutorial zone and instantly breaking everything. You've got Homelander on TV doing his fake patriotic creep act, thinking he's king shit. And then Tatsumaki just pops out of a hole in reality looking bored as fuck. She doesn't even acknowledge anyone. 0 respect. That alone already cooks their whole authority vibe. Then the soldiers start yelling orders like that's gonna do anything. And she just lifts a 14-ton truck like it's a toy and flips their bullets back at them just to be petty. No effort, no drama, just don't annoy me energy. Absolute domination. The Vought PR team freaking out in the background is honestly my favorite part. You know they're scrambling like a alien invasion, because how the fuck do you explain a tiny woman crushing 40 expensive drones into metal balls without touching them? There's no spin for that shit. What really gets me is seeing the local heroes posing for cameras thinking they're hot stuff, while Tatsumaki is looking at them like bugs she might step on by accident. And bro, let's be real. Homelander is 100% about to have a full mental breakdown. For the first time in his life, he's not the scariest thing in the room. And you can already feel that shit eating him alive. Honestly, it's just satisfying as hell watching this fake corporate superhero world slam straight into someone who's actually overpowered and doesn't give a single fuck about rules, laws, or scripts. Can't wait for the moment they realize their guns, contracts, and press conferences mean absolutely nothing to her. The news anchors were calling it a developing situation. That was the phrase networks used when nobody wanted to admit they had no idea what was happening. Footage looped on every channel. Shaky phone videos showing a figure in black standing motionless while vehicles floated and drones fell like hail. The Chiron cycled through variations of the same panic. Unknown threat. Meta-human attack national security crisis. At ground level, the deputized response team had different words for it. What the fuck is that? The speaker was Voltage real name Marcus Chen, formerly a regional hero doing mall appearances in Phoenix. 48 hours ago, he'd been deputized under emergency powers, given federal authority, and told he was defending America. Now he stood behind the corner of a federal building, armor gleaming under streetlights, watching something small and green-haired stand in the middle of Constitution Avenue, like she owned the asphalt. Beside him, Ironclad adjusted his helmet. The metal suit made him look 7 feet tall, all patriotic paint and shoulder-mounted recorders. Hostile metahuman. Orders are neutralize and contain. She's just standing there. Good, makes our job easier. Ironclad's voice carried that perfect blend of confidence and rehearsed bravado. He'd been media trained 3 times in the past week. Remember, we're live in 30 seconds. Look sharp. The camera crews were already setting up lenses trained on the intersection from 3 angles. This wasn't just enforcement. This was content. The American people needed to see their protectors in action, needed the reassurance that came from watching problems get solved by people in costumes who smiled for the press. Voltage glanced at the others. 5 total, all deputized within the past 72 hours. Razorwing, who could fly but not faster than a car. Tremor, whose seismic punches had leveled exactly 2 buildings and controlled demolition contracts. Phantasm, invisibility, limited to 60 seconds before migraines set in. And leading them, Ironclad, whose real superpower was looking presidential on camera. None of them had fought anything that mattered. 30 seconds, the cameraman called. Ironclad rolled his shoulders, metal joints grinding. Remember the script. We offer her 1 chance to surrender peacefully. When she refuses, we demonstrate appropriate force. He looked at each of them. This is what we trained for. They hadn't trained for anything. They'd been given talking points and sent to protect a system that assumed cameras were armor. 10 seconds. Tatsumaki hadn't moved. She stood with her hands loose at her sides, green hair drifting in wind that touched nothing else. From this distance, she looked like a civilian who'd wandered into the wrong frame. Live in 3-2. Ironclad stepped into the intersection, arms spread in the universal gesture of heroic arrival. The lenses tracked him automatically. Attention, unidentified metahuman. You are in violation of martial law emergency protocols. Stand down immediately, and you will not be harmed. His voice echoed off empty buildings. Very cinematic, very ineffective. Tatsumaki's head turned slowly, regarding him with the interest someone might show a mosquito. This is your only warning. Ironclad continued moving forward with the careful steps of someone aware he was being filmed from his good side. We are authorized to use necessary force to... He stopped. Not because he wanted to. Because his legs had ceased accepting commands, the armor locked joints frozen mid-stride, and he hung there like a statue someone had placed in the middle of the road. His arms remained spread face-locked in that heroic expression, while his nervous system screamed at limbs that no longer belonged to him. Ironclad, Voltage took a step forward, hand crackling with the electricity that had gotten him his contract. Ironclad status. The metal suit began to rise. Slowly, deliberately. Ironclad's boots left the pavement centimeter by centimeter, rising to eye level, then higher. 10 feet, 15. The cameras captured every second, every angle of a hero being treated like a toy someone was bored with. Jesus Christ, Phantasm whispered. Jesus. Razorwing launched wings spreading with the mechanical precision of expensive engineering. She'd been chosen for this team because flight looked good on camera, because wings made her seem angelic. She covered 30 feet before the air itself became solid. She hit the invisible wall at 40 miles per hour. The impact drove breath from her lungs' wings, crumpling like paper. She hung there, pressed against nothing, while gravity remembered she existed and pulled her down. The landing wasn't gentle. Asphalt met her helmet with a crack that made the operators flinch. Tremor-charged fists glowing with the seismic energy that had demolished condemned buildings under controlled conditions. His power required contact, required him to touch what he wanted to break. He made it 5 steps before his feet left the ground. All of them rose. Voltage electricity arcing uselessly into air. Phantasm trying desperately to activate invisibility that did nothing against someone who wasn't using eyes to track him. Tremors still throwing punches at nothing while hanging 15 feet up. Razorwing conscious now, wings beating frantically against air that had stopped caring about aerodynamics. Tatsumaki hadn't moved from her spot, hadn't raised her hands. hadn't shown any visible effort. She just looked at them, head tilted slightly, like she was waiting for them to understand something obvious. Recording continued. "Put us down." Ironclad's voice, cracked broadcast quality destroyed by panic. "Put us..." His suit began to rotate, slowly. A full 360-degree spin displayed perfectly for every angle the cameras could capture. The other four spun with him, a synchronized ballet of helplessness, 20 feet above the street. From behind their barrier, the crew looked at each other. This wasn't the content anyone had ordered. This wasn't heroes demonstrating appropriate force. This was something else entirely. Something that made the word hero feel thin and inadequate. "Should we cut the feed?" one whispered. "Are you kidding? This is going everywhere." And it was. Already. 40 million people watching live as their deputized protectors spun in the air like children's toys, unable to descend, unable to fight, unable to do anything except demonstrate exactly how irrelevant their authority had become. Tatsumaki lowered them. Not dropped. Lowered. Each one settling to the pavement with the gentleness of something being placed rather than released. Their boots touched concrete and stayed their body armor. Intact bones unbroken. Alive. Humiliated. But alive. Ironclad tried to stand. His legs wouldn't support him. None of them could stand. They knelt there on Constitution Avenue, breathing hard, while Tatsumaki regarded them with an expression that might have been boredom. "You done?" Her voice carried across the intersection, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Ironclad's mouth worked. No words came. His script hadn't covered this. "Good." She turned away, dismissing them completely, and continued toward the center of the city. Behind her, 5 deputized heroes remained kneeling. Footage kept streaming, and somewhere, in 40 million homes, people were realizing that the emergency powers and federal authority and carefully managed narratives had just met something that didn't acknowledge any of it. In Vought Tower, keyboards clattered in desperate synchronization. The footage was already viral, but virality could be managed. The first headlines were already drafted: "Terrorist uses unknown technology to assault heroes." The fact-checkers were being mobilized. The social media teams were preparing counter-narratives. Within the hour, there would be deep-fake allegations, crisis actor accusations, anything to make people doubt what they'd seen with their own eyes. But in the control room, one analyst stared at the monitor and understood something her training hadn't prepared her for. "We can't spin this." Her supervisor looked up. "Everything spins. That's what we do. Not this." She replayed the footage frame by frame. Tatsumaki standing still, while 5 heroes rose. The complete absence of visible technology of anything that could be explained away as equipment or trick photography. She didn't touch them. Didn't use anything. Just decided they were going up. So we call it manipulation, deep fake, Russian technology. And when she does it again, the analyst's voice was steady, but her hands shook. "What do we call it when she does it to Homelander?" Silence spread through the room like frost. On Constitution Avenue, the deputized team was finally being extracted by personnel who looked at them without speaking. Medical would check for injuries. PR would check for usable sound bites. Legal would check for liability. Nobody would check whether they still believed the narrative they'd been sold. Voltage sat in the back of an ambulance, hands still trembling with electricity he hadn't been allowed to use. "She didn't even try," he said to nobody in particular. "We came at her with everything, and she didn't even try." The EMT nodded, not sure what response training had prepared her for. What the fuck are we supposed to do against that? There was no answer. Not one that fit inside the framework of martial law and emergency powers and authorized force. The framework had just learned it was optional. And the thing that made it optional was walking deeper into their carefully controlled city, like she owned every inch of it. 2 miles away, in a command center buried deep enough to survive conventional strikes, Sage watched 7 screens simultaneously. Her fingers moved across a tablet adjusting variables in real-time projections. The math was getting worse. Every scenario she'd modeled had assumed the variable could be contained through conventional superpowered response. 47 different tactical approaches, each one predicated on the target operating within known parameters of meta-human capability. The variable had just demonstrated she wasn't operating within any parameters at all. Sage pulled up the latest analysis. Power output, insufficient data. Limitations, none observed. Vulnerabilities, none identified. Psychological profile, minimal engagement. Maximum efficiency, 0. Concern for public perception. She highlighted that last part. 0 concern for public perception. That was the crack in everything. You couldn't manipulate someone who didn't care how they were seen. Couldn't threaten someone who operated outside the social contracts that made threats meaningful. Her phone buzzed. Homelander's contact no message, just a demand for answers she didn't have yet. Sage looked at the screens again. Tatsumaki had stopped in front of the Capitol building, just standing there looking up at the dome like she was cataloging it for later. The math said this ended one of 3 ways. Either the variable achieved her objective and left, or she was eliminated by force that didn't currently exist in their arsenal. Or she decided Washington, D.C. needed a more aggressive demonstration of what happened when systems tried to control things they didn't understand. Sage didn't like any of those equations. She picked up the phone. "We need to escalate past conventional response." Her voice was clinical, stripped of anything that might sound like fear. "Deploy everything we have. And get me Homelander. Tell him it's time to actually work." The line went quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, Homelander is already en route." He saw the footage. Of course he did. The footage of 5 heroes being made irrelevant on live television. The footage that made his emergency powers look like paper authority. Homelander wouldn't tolerate that. Couldn't tolerate that. His entire existence was built on being the biggest, the strongest, the one who made the rules. Sage closed her eyes. Math didn't lie, but humans did. And Homelander was about to lie to himself very loudly about what he could accomplish against something that had just demonstrated she operated on a completely different scale. "Get camera crews to his landing zone," she said finally. "If he's going to make this worse, at least we can control the narrative." On Constitution Avenue, Tatsumaki tilted her head up toward the sky. Above her, contrails marked something approaching fast. Something that thought momentum and altitude were advantages. Something that had never learned the difference between being strong and being unopposable. She didn't smile this time. She just waited. Guys, Chapter 2 is honestly just embarrassing for Vought in the funniest way. They really rolled out their dollar store Avengers thinking this was gonna work. You can tell immediately these dudes like Ironclad and Voltage are just actors in cosplay. They're worried about camera angles, cool poses, and one-liners instead of actually doing anything useful. Yeah, and Tatsumaki clocks that shit instantly. She doesn't fight them, she just freezes them in mid-air like action figures still in the damn packaging. No struggle, no tension. Just, nah, you're done. And the funniest part is when she starts spinning them around for everyone to see. That's such a savage move, because she's not even hurting them. She's just publicly proving they're toys. Like, look at these clowns, this is what you hyped up. Honestly, Sage feels like the only person in that building with a working brain. While everyone else is scrambling like, can we call this a deep fake, she realizes you can't PR your way out of someone who doesn't give a single fuck about your rules. Your image or your audience, watching the corporate panic kick in is so damn satisfying. You can feel the moment they realize their whole hero system is bullshit when faced with a real threat. And sending Homelander at the end, bro, that's a full desperation move. A straight Hail Mary. His ego is already fragile as hell, and he is absolutely not ready for the disrespect that's coming his way. Morning brought new headlines and the same lies wearing different clothes. Every network ran the same B-roll on loop, carefully curated to show deputized heroes advancing with purpose, while convenient gaps in coverage erased what happened next. The anchors spoke in the measured tones of people reading scripts they'd been told not to question. Phrases repeated across channels with the consistency of talking points distributed before sunrise. Foreign threat, public safety, unverified claims. The footage from Constitution Avenue existed in 40 million phones, but existence wasn't the same as acceptance. By 7 a.m., fact-checking sites had labeled it disputed. By 8, think pieces questioned whether enhanced metahumans could fake telekinetic effects using wirework and CGI. By 9, the trending hashtag was asking what foreign government stood to benefit from Americans doubting their protectors. Truth had ceased being about what happened. It was about which version got repeated often enough to feel real. In a conference room at Vought Tower, 12 people sat around a table covered in tablets and anxiety. The director of crisis management hadn't slept. Neither had anyone else. They'd spent the night transforming a disaster into a controlled narrative, and the bags under their eyes were the only honest thing in the room. We're calling it an electromagnetic anomaly, someone said, sliding a briefing document across polished wood. Russian technology, possibly Chinese. The metahuman is either a plant or being manipulated. Either way, she's not acting alone. What about the witnesses? Another voice, younger, less certain about the ethics of what they were engineering. Discredited. We've got social media teams highlighting past arrests, unpaid debts, anything that makes them look unreliable. The director didn't blink. People believe what fits their worldview. We're just providing the frame. Nobody asked if it was true. Truth was a luxury they couldn't afford. Across the city, in apartments where people still believed screens told them what mattered, the message was landing exactly as designed. Fear needed a target. Confusion needed an answer. The system provided both wrapped in the flag and delivered by voices that sounded like they were helping. Tatsumaki heard none of it. She stood in front of a communications hub, a concrete building that housed the servers and relay equipment keeping Vaught's narrative machine operational. No windows, heavy doors. The kind of infrastructure that assumed importance through dullness. Her hand rose barely. The building's facade rippled. Not violently, no explosion, no dramatic collapse. Just a subtle warping of reinforced concrete steel supports, bending with the gentle insistence of something that didn't acknowledge material resistance. The walls bowed inward slowly, while inside the racks of servers felt pressure mounting from directions physics textbooks didn't cover. Circuit boards cracked, hard drives compressed. Fiber optic cables snapped like overcooked pasta. The building didn't fall. It just stopped being useful for anything except demonstrating what happened when you confused infrastructure with invulnerability. 3 blocks away, a producer's screen went dark mid-upload. The carefully edited footage showing heroes in heroic poses dissolved into static. Backup servers spun uselessly, trying to access data that had been reduced to the electronic equivalent of pulp. "We're down," someone shouted into a phone. "Everything on the eastern relay, it's all gone." In the tower, alarms began their familiar song of systems failing in ways they weren't designed to acknowledge. The director looked at the displays showing dead feeds and felt something he'd been trained never to show. Panic. "How?" His voice came out quieter than intended. How did she even know where? She didn't need to know. The analyst from the previous night spoke without looking up from her screen. She just had to break things until the right thing stopped working. Efficient. Precise. The kind of problem-solving that didn't waste effort on warning or theatrics. On the street, Tatsumaki had already moved on. A broadcast van sat at an intersection satellite dish, pointed skyward crew, inside preparing another segment about the ongoing security incident. They'd been there since midnight, running a live feed that showed concerned reporters standing in front of empty streets while explaining why Americans should be very afraid. The van rose, not high, just enough to make the wheels meaningless and the satellite dish point at nothing useful. It rotated slowly, giving the crew inside time to understand that their equipment answered to someone who wasn't on their org chart. The lead reporter, woman who'd built a career on looking serious while reading other people's words, found herself staring at the ceiling. While gravity took a coffee break, her makeup stayed perfect. Her expression did not. "Put us down," she said, voice steady despite the situation, suggesting otherwise. "This is assault on press freedom." Tatsumaki set the van down a block away, oriented backward satellite dish now pointing at a brick wall. The crew remained unharmed. Their ability to broadcast remained thoroughly interrupted. She didn't explain, didn't leave a message, just made sure the machinery of narrative construction had to work harder to avoid the inconvenient gaps where truth lived. By noon, Vought's communications network had more holes than a conspiracy theorist's timeline. 3 more relay stations showed structural damage consistent with forces that shouldn't exist outside theoretical physics. 2 broadcast towers reported equipment failures that made no mechanical sense. 1 satellite uplink just stopped working entirely. The dish bent at an angle that suggested someone had decided radio waves were negotiable. In the tower, the director stared at a map showing red marks where infrastructure used to work. "She's not attacking people." He said it like an accusation. "She's attacking our ability to control what people think happened." Sage entered the room without knocking. She surveyed the map, the faces around the table, the fear masquerading as strategic concern. "Of course she is." Sage pulled up a chair, claimed it without asking permission. "She doesn't care about the narrative. She cares about its delivery mechanism." Her fingers moved across a tablet, pulling up data the others hadn't thought to compile. Every target she's hit serves the same function: information flow. She's not fighting the lie. She's making it harder to tell. "So what do we do?" Sage smiled, and it wasn't comforting. "We adapt. She can break our infrastructure, but she can't break human nature. People want to believe they're protected. We give them that belief through different channels." "How?" "Homelander." She said it like it was obvious. "No infrastructure needed. Just put him on camera with her and let America see what protection looks like." Around the table, people shifted uncomfortably. They'd all seen the same footage everyone else had. Deputized heroes spinning in the air like laundry on a surreal cycle. The gap between superpowered authority and whatever Tatsumaki represented had been demonstrated thoroughly. "You think he can? I think he needs to try." Sage's voice carried the clinical certainty of someone who'd run the numbers. "Public needs to see their strongest protector facing the threat. Doesn't matter if he wins. Matters that he shows up. The director opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's insane. That's narrative management. Sage stood adjusting her jacket with the practiced ease of someone comfortable with sending people to fail publicly. Get the camera crews to wherever she is now. Make sure Homelander knows where to make his entrance. And somebody write him something that sounds presidential. She paused at the door, looked back at the director. Also increase martial law enforcement radius by 2 miles. If she's hitting infrastructure, make sure people see us protecting what matters. That'll put troops in residential, I know. Sage walked out, leaving the implication hanging like smog over a city that had abandoned pretending it was free. On the street, Tatsumaki stood in front of the Capitol building. She'd been there before briefly, but now she actually looked at it. The dome, the steps, the architecture designed to suggest permanence and authority through sheer mass and symmetry. Behind her, another broadcast van lay on its side, crew extracting themselves with the careful movements of people who'd just learned their job had occupational hazards nobody mentioned in training. The building's entrance opened. Secret Service emerged, weapons-drawn faces showing the expression of people whose training had definitely not covered this scenario. Ma'am, step away from the Capitol building. This is federal property. Tatsumaki glanced at them. Not hostile, just acknowledgement that they were making noise. You done? Her voice carried that same flat quality, the tone of someone allergic to wasting words on obvious situations. The agents exchanged glances, their weapons, her, the overturned broadcast equipment. The basic math of trying to enforce property rights against someone who demonstrated property was a social construct she didn't subscribe to. We can't just let you can't stop me. She said it without malice, without pride, just fact. So either shoot or get out of the way. Nobody shot. They retreated to the building's interior, calling for backup that had the same fundamental problem. Authority meant nothing to someone who hadn't agreed to recognize it. Tatsumaki turned back to the Capitol, examining it with the interest of someone cataloging how power presented itself through stone and symbolism. She didn't touch it, didn't threaten it. Just stood there, small and green-haired, making the entire edifice of American government appear exactly as important as she considered it. Which was to say, not very. Above the city, contrails drew lines across winter sky. Something was approaching fast, coming from the north, with the kind of velocity that announced itself through sonic phenomena. The Secret Service agents still watching from behind bulletproof glass recognized the signature before visual confirmation. Homelander. Finally coming to face the thing that had made his emergency powers look like theater. Tatsumaki tilted her head slightly, tracking the approaching figure with the casual attention of someone noting where flies buzzed. Her expression didn't change. Didn't prepare for combat or conversation. She just waited while around her the city held its breath and the cameras that still worked pointed their lenses at the sky. The narrative was about to get a centerpiece it couldn't edit. And nobody knew if that would make things better or infinitely worse. All right, so Chapter 3 is where Vought really starts looking stupid. They keep saying Tatsumaki is Russian tech or some science thing, but it just sounds desperate. You can tell they're making it up as they go and hoping people don't notice. What I really like is how Tatsumaki stops fighting heroes and starts going after the cameras and servers. She figures out real quick that Vought's real power isn't punches, it's media. So she just breaks the stuff that tells the story. No cameras, no lies. That's smart as hell. The news people trying to stay calm while their gear is getting crushed is honestly funny. Everything is falling apart and they're still reading the script. Sage is clearly the only one with a brain there. She knows you can't control the story if nothing is recording. So the best part is the Secret Service guys seeing her and instantly backing off. No yelling, no hero talk, just yeah, nope, and they leave. That's the smartest move anyone makes. And sending Homelander at the end, I really think Sage knows he's gonna mess this up. His ego is huge, and he's not used to being ignored or embarrassed. Going up against someone who doesn't care about him at all is probably gonna break him. The city held its breath. Pedestrians who'd ignored every curfew warning now pressed themselves against storefronts' phones, raised recording. News helicopters circled at maximum safe distance, their pilots having received very clear instructions about what happened to equipment that got too close. Every functioning broadcast relay in Washington pointed toward the Capitol steps, where history was about to fail a basic physics test. Homelander descended from the North Contrail, dissipating behind him, like the vapor trail of inevitability itself. He took his time. Let the cameras frame him properly against winter sky cape billowing, with the kind of dramatic precision that came from years of understanding optics. The landing was perfect boots touching marble with barely a sound. Arms relaxed at his sides in that casual pose that said he could destroy you but probably wouldn't need to. The smile came next. That carefully calibrated blend of reassurance and dominance, the expression that had sold 1 million action figures and twice as many lies. "Hey there." His voice carried across the plaza without effort, amplified by confidence and vocal cords that didn't acknowledge normal human limitations. "I'm gonna need you to come with me." Tatsumaki regarded him with the same interest she'd shown every other obstacle, minimal and fading fast. Homelander's smile held. "I know you're confused, probably scared. This is a lot right, new place, new faces, everybody treating you like a threat." He spread his hands, the universal gesture of someone offering help while cameras watched. "But that's what I'm here for, to help. That's what we do." She said nothing. "See, thing is," Homelander took a step forward, still smiling, still aware of every angle being recorded. "You've hurt a lot of people, damaged property, caused panic, and I get it. Culture shock, maybe where you're from, things work different. But here?" He gestured at the Capitol behind her, at the city, at America itself. "Here we have rules. And I'm the guy who makes sure everybody plays by them." Tatsumaki tilted her head slightly, the gesture of someone waiting for a point that might eventually arrive. Homelander's smile tightened. Just a fraction. Just enough that someone watching closely might notice the seams starting to show. "So here's what's going to happen." His voice dropped half an octave, losing some of the media polish, gaining something harder underneath. "You're gonna surrender peacefully. We'll get you someplace safe, figure out what you are, and make sure you get the help you need. Because I really truly do not want to hurt you." He paused, letting that sink in, letting the cameras catch the benevolence in his expression. "But if you make me..." The smile vanished. "I will." Silence stretched across the plaza. In 100,000 homes, people leaned toward their screens. In Vought Tower, executives held their breath. In the bunker beneath the city, Sage watched 7 feeds simultaneously and started a timer. Tatsumaki yawned. Not big, not theatrical. Just a small, genuine yawn, the kind that suggested this conversation had gone on longer than her interest could sustain. Homelander's jaw clenched. The cameras caught it, that micro-expression of someone unused to being dismissed, and in editing rooms across the city, producers made notes about which angle showed it clearest. "You think this is funny?" His voice carried an edge, now the warmth burned away, to expose something that had been there all along. "You think you can just..." His eyes lit red. Heat vision lanced out twin beams of concentrated energy that had cut through steel concrete and anything else that had been stupid enough to get between Homelander and what he wanted. The beams curved. Not dramatically. No explosive deflection. They just bent, drawn off course by forces that had nothing to do with the trajectory Homelander had intended. The energy splashed harmlessly against empty air 15 feet to Tatsumaki's left, carving glowing lines into nothing before dissipating. Homelander blinked. Tried again. The second burst twisted even harder, arcing up toward the sky like someone had decided light should take the scenic route. The third barely made it 3 feet before curling back on itself, forcing Homelander to cut the beam before it became his own problem. What? He rose into the air using altitude the way he always had, leveraging the advantage of three-dimensional combat against opponents stuck on the ground. Tatsumaki didn't move. Homelander circled fast, using speed that had always worked before. Came in from the side fist, cocked, ready to demonstrate what happened when you made America's greatest hero actually try. He stopped mid-flight. Not because he chose to, because forward motion had become a suggestion his body no longer had authority to act on. He hung there 20 feet up, arm still extended in a punch that would never land, face locked in an expression of effort that was rapidly shifting toward confusion. From the ground, Tatsumaki's hand had risen. Barely. Just enough to make the gesture clear. Homelander pushed, strained, activated every ounce of super strength that had let him bench press trains and stop missiles. His face reddened with exertion. Veins stood out on his neck. The cape fluttered with micro-movements that went nowhere. He didn't descend, didn't advance, didn't do anything except demonstrating in high definition across every working camera that trying very hard accomplished nothing against someone who'd decided he wasn't going anywhere. Let me, his voice came out strained. Let me go. No. Tatsumaki's voice carried that same flat quality, the tone of someone stating obvious facts to slow learners. She rotated her hand, slow, almost lazy. Homelander spun. Not fast, not violently. Just a steady, controlled rotation that turned him in a complete circle while he hung suspended, giving every camera angle a perfect 360 view of America's strongest hero being treated like a display model. His arms flailed, trying to find purchase in air that had stopped caring about his intentions. Stop this! The command came out more plea than order. You don't know who you're... Tatsumaki brought her hand down. Homelander descended with it drawn earthward with the same inexorable patience she'd shown the broadcast vans and relay towers. His boots touched marble. Stayed there. He tried to launch himself skyward and made it exactly nowhere, feet glued to stone by forces that didn't acknowledge his strength as relevant. For 5 seconds, Homelander stood on the Capitol steps, unable to move, unable to fly. Unable to do anything except understand that the thing he'd come to intimidate had decided he was allowed to stand still and nothing else. The cameras captured every second. In Vought Tower, someone's coffee cup hit the floor. In the bunker, Sage's timer read 4 minutes 30 seconds. She'd predicted 5. Close enough. On the Capitol steps, Homelander's expression cycled through confusion, rage, fear, and landed somewhere that looked like a man remembering he had an audience and scrambling to find the mask he'd dropped. The pressure released. Homelander stumbled, caught himself, straightened with the kind of overcorrection that told everyone watching he genuinely thought he might fall. His smile returned shaky, lacking the polish of the one he'd arrived with. See, his voice came out too loud, too bright. That's what I mean. Dangerous. Unpredictable. He backed away, still trying to sell it, still trying to make this look like a tactical retreat instead of what it actually was. This is exactly why we need to get you contained. For your own safety. And everyone else's. He rose into the air, slower than his arrival, putting distance between himself and the thing that had made him irrelevant. I'll be back. The threat sounded hollow even to him. With everything I need to stop you. Tatsumaki watched him go with the same minimal interest she'd shown his arrival. When he'd climbed high enough that she'd need to actually care to reach him, she turned away, dismissing him as thoroughly as she'd dismissed every other attempt at intimidation. Homelander hovered for another moment, cape snapping in high-altitude wind, trying to find something to say that would salvage this. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came. He flew north faster than he'd arrived, leaving contrails and shattered illusions in equal measure. On the ground, the Secret Service agents emerged from their defensive positions, looking at each other. Then at Tatsumaki, then at the space where Homelander had been suspended like a puppet with cut strings. "Should we?" one started. "No." His partner's voice carried the certainty of someone who just watched their fundamental assumptions about power get revised. "We should not." They retreated back inside, leaving Tatsumaki alone with the cameras and the city and the slowly dawning understanding that had just gone viral across 40 million screens. In homes across America, people sat in silence. Some replayed the footage looking for the trick, the edit, the angle that would make it make sense. Others just stared, watching the impossible become recorded fact. Watching their strongest protector get treated like a minor inconvenience by something small and green-haired and utterly disinterested in their entire framework of power. The hashtag started within seconds. Hashtag Homelander down. Trending before he'd crossed state lines. Hashtag who is this competing with hashtag where did she come from? And hashtag what is Vought hiding now? The memes came faster, crueler, more creative than Vought's social media teams could possibly counter. Screenshots of Homelander's face mid-rotation. GIFs of his boots stuck to marble. Comparisons to action figures, puppets, anything that captured the fundamental humiliation of being moved by someone who hadn't bothered to walk toward you. In Vought Tower, the crisis room had gone silent. The directors stared at monitors showing engagement metrics that were climbing past anything they could feasibly manage. Every suppression tactic they'd used in the past 48 hours had just become irrelevant. You couldn't spin what 40 million people had watched live. Couldn't deepfake what every major network had broadcast unedited. Couldn't discredit witnesses when the witness was their own golden boy. Recorded in crystal clarity, demonstrating that the thing they'd built their entire empire on had limitations after all. "Get Sage." His voice sounded distant, shocked. "Get her now." But Sage was already walking through the door, tablet in hand, expression clinical and unreadable. "Homelander's 15 minutes out." She said it like a weather report. "He'll be here, angry, humiliated, and dangerous. We need to redirect that before he punches through something we can't replace. Redirect it where..." Sage pulled up footage on the main screen. Different angles of the confrontation already being analyzed frame by frame. He needs to feel like he's still in control of something. Give him targets he can actually hurt. Expand enforcement radius. Put him in charge of securing the perimeter. She made air quotes with obvious disdain. Let him break things that make him feel strong again. "That'll mean civilian..." "I know." Sage's voice carried no apology. "But we've got two choices. Manage Homelander's ego and pay the cost in acceptable casualties, or lose him entirely and watch our entire infrastructure collapse when the public realizes their god has feet of clay." She gestured at the screens, showing Tatsumaki still standing at the Capitol, unbothered, unharmed, unchanged. Right now, she's the problem everyone's looking at. We need to keep it that way. Which means Homelander needs to feel like he's still the solution, even if... She paused, considering her words. Especially if he's not. The director looked at the footage again. Homelander spinning. Homelander grounded. Homelander retreating. What do we do about her? Sage closed her tablet. Nothing conventional will work. We saw that. So we stopped trying to beat her. She walked toward the door, stopped, looked back. We make her the villain who won't let us protect people. Every casualty from here on gets blamed on her presence. Every escalation becomes her fault. We can't control what she does, but we can control what people think about what she does. You really think that'll work? I think it's the only play we have left. Sage's smile was tired, analytical, devoid of satisfaction. She broke our strongest piece. Now we play with what's left and hope the board doesn't notice. She left, and the room stayed quiet, filled with the sound of metrics climbing and foundations cracking. On the Capitol steps, Tatsumaki sat down. Just sat like a person tired of standing on marble, that had witnessed speeches and ceremonies and the machinery of American power for 200 years. She pulled her knees up, rested her arms on them, and looked out at the city with the expression of someone waiting for whatever came next. Above her, helicopters maintained their distance. Around her, the city hummed with the noise of systems trying to pretend they still worked. And somewhere north, Homelander flew toward Vought Tower with fists clenched and ego bleeding, ready to make anyone understand that he was still the one who mattered. He just wasn't sure he believed it anymore. Holy shit, like Chapter 4 is wild because this is where Homelander finally gets exposed. He pulls up like he always does, perfect hair, big smile, talking like he already won, trying to scare Tatsumaki into backing down. And she just does not care at all. Okay, now the best part is her straight-up yawning while he talks. Like she's bored out of her mind. That alone already destroys him. Then he loses it and fires his laser eyes, and somehow the beams just curve away and do nothing. Even his powers are like, nah. Well, when he tries to punch her and just stops mid-air, you can tell his brain is breaking. He's never been stuck like that before. He's strong, sure, but it means nothing here. And then she starts slowly spinning him in the air just to show everyone watching that he's helpless. That part is hilarious and brutal at the same time. Honestly, I think Sage Loki enjoyed watching him get embarrassed. She knows Homelander is a pain in the ass, but now she has to explain why their god just got played on live TV. That's gotta hurt. You've to be kidding me. What's really crazy is that Vought's whole image starts falling apart right here. All it took was one small woman who didn't listen to his speech and didn't fear him at all. Now everyone can see it clearly. Homelander isn't some unstoppable monster. He's just a dude in a cape who can get shut down whenever she feels like it. The facility had no official name. Government documents called it Detention Site 7, tucked into Maryland farmland, where corn once grew and questions rarely reached. Chain link topped with concertina wire formed perimeters that looked temporary, but weren't. Guard towers dotted the corners, manned by personnel who'd been told they were protecting America from internal threats, and believed it because the alternative required thinking. Inside, 300 people existed in the space between legal limbo and extrajudicial punishment. Most were protesters from the Capitol occupation attempt. Some were journalists who'd asked wrong questions at wrong times. A few were family members of known dissidents, guilt established through association rather than action. The youngest was 14. The oldest couldn't remember anymore. None of them had been charged with crimes. Martial law made that particular formality optional. 20 miles north, in a commandeered safe house that smelled like mold and poor decisions, the boys reviewed satellite footage on screens that flickered with questionable legality. There, MM pointed at thermal signatures clustered near the southern perimeter. Guard rotation changes at 0400. Skeleton crew for 90 seconds. Starlight leaned closer, and exhaustion written in the dark circles under her eyes. She'd been awake for 36 hours running interference on social media, trying to counter narratives that had already calcified into accepted truth. We can't extract 300 people through a 90-second window. We're not extracting anyone. Butcher's voice came from the corner where he stood, arms crossed, face wearing that expression of someone who'd made peace with consequences before they happened. We're creating a distraction. Let our new friend do the heavy lifting. She's not our friend. MM didn't look up from the screen. She's not even on our side. She's on the side of making Vaught's life difficult. Good enough for me. Starlight turned, and there was steel underneath the weariness. You're talking about using her, like she's a weapon you can point. She is a weapon. Butcher's smile held no warmth. Just happens to be one Vought can't control. So we help her find targets worth breaking. She helps us break things worth destroying. Everybody wins, except the cunts who deserve to lose. And when she figures out what you're planning with the virus, silence stretched, filled only with the hum of illegal electronics. Then we hope, Butcher said finally, that she's as practical about ends justifying means as I am. M shook his head, jaw tight. This is a mistake. Probably. Butcher pushed off the wall, grabbing his jacket. But it's the only play we've got that doesn't end with us dead or them winning. So we make the call live with the consequences and pray she kills the right people when everything goes to shit. He walked out, leaving the others in silence that tasted like complicity. 15 miles south, Tatsumaki stood at the facility's outer perimeter, regarding the wire and towers with the clinical interest of someone cataloging infrastructure designed to contain humans like inventory. She'd found it easily. Vaught's attempts at secrecy relied on misdirection and classification. But you couldn't hide 300 people generating heat signatures and waste logistics from someone willing to break into the right servers and read the documents nobody thought needed physical protection. The guards saw her approach. Training kicked in before common sense could interfere. Weapons raised warnings, shouted protocols activated with the muscle memory of people who'd practiced responses to every scenario except the one actually happening. Tatsumaki raised one hand. The fence peeled back. Not violently. No explosion, no sparks showering from severed power lines. The chain link simply separated from its posts and curled away, like paper encountering flame metal bending, with the patient inevitability of something that had stopped being a barrier and become scrap awaiting classification. Concertina wire untangled itself, spiraling into neat coils on the ground, sharp edges now pointing at nothing. The guards fired. Rounds, slowed 3 feet from their target, hung suspended in air that had developed opinions about ballistic trajectories, then dropped to earth with the dull thunk of ammunition failing its primary purpose. One guard, young enough that his training was fresher than his judgment, tried to rush her. He made it 5 steps before his boots adhered to concrete with forces that redefined the term grounded. His momentum carried his torso forward while his feet stayed put, and he crashed face first into the ground with the grace of physics asserting dominance. Tatsumaki walked past him without acknowledgement, entering the facility through the gap where security used to exist. The towers came next. She didn't destroy them. Didn't need to. The structures simply tilted slowly, until the angles made climbing down more appealing than staying put. Guards descended ladders with the careful movements of people realizing their height advantage had become a liability. Inside the main compound, soups in deputized uniforms assembled for response. A dozen of them powers, ranging from enhanced strength to minor pyrokinesis. All carrying the confidence of people who'd been told they were special and believed it because nobody had corrected them yet. Their leader, a man whose muscles had muscles and whose brain had press releases where tactics should live, stepped forward with hands spread in what he probably thought was an intimidating gesture. "You're trespassing on federal..." Tatsumaki lifted all 12 of them. No drama, no theatrics. They simply rose in formation, maintaining their relative positions while gravity filed for divorce. The pyrokinetic tried to conjure flames-managed sparks that guttered out when concentration became difficult with blood rushing to your head. She rotated the group 90 degrees, oriented them horizontal, and drifted them to the side, like moving furniture that occasionally screamed about rights and authority. Set them down 20 yards away on the other side of the perimeter, where their powers could be loud and irrelevant in equal measure. The detention blocks opened easier than the gates had. Locks that required keys and authorization codes discovered they required neither when subjected to forces that made security feel like a polite suggestion. Doors swung wide, hinges complaining, but complying, revealing corridors lined with cells that held people whose only crime had been inconvenient to a system that preferred obedience to justice. Tatsumaki walked down the central passage and the cell doors opened in her wake. Not all at once. One at a time, methodical, giving the people inside time to understand they weren't being moved to different cages. The locks clicked open with the precise rhythm of someone who understood that freedom delivered too fast felt like another kind of trap. People emerged slowly, some crying, some silent, some so numb that liberty required explanation before reaction. A woman with gray hair and a journalist's eyes looked at Tatsumaki, then at the open corridor, then back. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter." Tatsumaki's voice carried no inflection, no invitation to gratitude or worship. "You're leaving. That way." She gestured toward the compromised perimeter. "Don't stop until you're somewhere they can't pretend didn't happen. They'll come after us." "Let them try." The woman nodded, understanding filtering through shock. She turned to the others. "Move, now, before someone decides this is a mistake." They moved. Not running, not panicking, but with the determined shuffle of people who'd learned that opportunities closed faster than they opened. 300 bodies filtering through corridors designed for control, but currently experiencing technical difficulties with that entire concept. Outside, the boys watched from a ridge half a mile distant. MM had binoculars trained on the facility, watching infrastructure fail in real time. "She's not killing anyone." "I noticed." Butcher's tone suggested he wasn't sure if that was tactical brilliance or a missed opportunity. Starlight lowered her own binoculars. "She's giving them a chance to run. She's creating a PR nightmare for Vought." Butcher pulled out his phone, already composing messages to contacts who had leaked this faster than official channels could suppress it. "Camps full of Americans, no charges, no trials. Put that next to footage of her opening the doors, and we've got a narrative even Sage can't spin." "Is that all this is to you?" Starlight's voice carried an edge that suggested the question wasn't entirely rhetorical. "Narrative warfare. It's what works when strength doesn't." Butcher pocketed the phone. "She's got the power, we've got the context. Together we make Vought's life a living hell." He paused. "Of course, there's still the question of what happens when she finds out about the virus," MM's jaw tightened. You're really going through with that? Got 300 doses ready. Samir's been busy. Butcher's voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd made decisions and buried the doubts. One deployment in a major population center, we eradicate every soup in a 50-mile radius. Rinse, repeat until there's no compound V-enhanced bastards left to play dress-up and pretend they're gods. That's genocide. That's extermination of an invasive species. Butcher met MM's glare without flinching. They're not natural. They're not human. They're lab-grown weapons with PR departments, and the world's better off when they're gone. She's enhanced too. Different. Butcher looked back toward the facility where Tatsumaki was dismantling the machinery of oppression without breaking a sweat. She's not running around in a cape selling action figures. She's not pretending to be something she's not. He turned back to MM. But if it comes down to her or us, if she gets in the way of ending this permanently. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. At the facility, the last of the detained filed through the broken perimeter. Tatsumaki remained ensuring the exodus completed without interruption from guards who'd found courage tangled somewhere in their compromised hierarchy. A convoy of vehicles approached from the north. Federal response belated, but inevitable here, to reassert control over a situation that had stopped acknowledging their authority. Tatsumaki watched them come. The lead vehicle's tires compressed axles, bending frames, settling to the ground with the terminal patience of machines, realizing motion had become optional. The convoy stopped 300 yards out, soldiers emerging with weapons raised and certainty crumbling. She didn't approach them, didn't threaten, just stood there, small and green-haired and utterly disinterested in their protocols, while 300 people scattered into Maryland farmland behind her. When the last detainee disappeared beyond the tree line, Tatsumaki turned and walked away, leaving the guards and soldiers and compromised infrastructure to explain to supervisors how a single person had made their entire operation look exactly as legitimate as it actually was. Which was to say, not at all. On the ridge, Butcher lowered his binoculars. Time to make contact. You sure that's smart? MM's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many bad ideas metastasize into catastrophes. Smart left the building when we started this war. Butcher started down the slope toward where Tatsumaki's trajectory would intersect their position. But necessary's still on the table, and we need to know if she's an ally or just another problem waiting to explode. Starlight followed, reluctant but unwilling to let Butcher do this alone. MM came last, hand resting on the weapon he hoped he wouldn't need. They reached the intersection point as Tatsumaki emerged from the woods, expression unchanged. Clothes bearing no marks from the facility she'd just dismantled. Butcher stepped forward, hands visible posture suggesting negotiation rather than threat. Nice work back there. Tatsumaki regarded him with the interest she'd shown every other obstacle minimal and fighting fast. We should talk, Butcher continued. About Vought. About what comes next. About no. Her voice carried that same flat quality, the tone of someone allergic to wasting time on obvious conclusions. Butcher's smile tightened. You don't even know what I'm offering. You're offering to use me. Tatsumaki's eyes met his, and there was no warmth in the assessment, no room for manipulation. You want a weapon you can point. Something stronger than them, more willing than her. She gestured vaguely toward Starlight. You think I'm a bomb you can drop on Vought and walk away clean. Silence stretched, and if I said you're right, then I'd say you're also planning something worse. Tatsumaki tilted her head, slightly studying Butcher the way entomologists studied insects. You've got that look. The kind that says you've decided who deserves to die and sleep fine with it. Butcher's jaw clenched. You don't know me. I know enough. She turned to to Starlight. You two actually care about people. He just cares about revenge, wearing a justice costume. Back to Butcher. So here's what happens. I'll keep breaking Vought's toys. You can help or watch. But if you try to turn this into something worse than what we're fighting. She raised one hand barely, and the ground beneath Butcher's feet rippled. You're next. The pressure released. Butcher's boots settled back on solid earth. We clear. Butcher held her gaze for a long moment, weighing pride against survival ideology, against pragmatism. Crystal. Tatsumaki walked past them without another word, heading toward the next piece of infrastructure that needed dismantling. The boys stood in silence, watching her go. Well, Starlight said finally, that went better than expected. Did it? MM's voice was quiet. Because it sounds like we just got read the terms of engagement by someone who'll kill us if we cross a line she hasn't defined. Butcher lit a cigarette, hand steady despite the threat that had just walked away. She knows about the virus, or suspects. We don't know that. She knows. Butcher exhaled smoke. Question is whether she'll let us use it if we keep the target narrow enough. He looked at at Starlight, or whether we'll have to choose between stopping Vought and surviving her. He started walking back toward the safe house, leaving the others to follow. Behind them, Maryland farmland resumed its silence, broken only by the distant sounds of guards calling for backup that would arrive too late, and 300 freed people learning what happened after cages open. Freedom felt less like victory and more like the space between tragedies. But it was space. And for now, that had to be enough. All right, so Chapter 5 is basically Tatsumaki doing community service, also scaring the shit out of everyone. She walks up to this illegal prison camp and just rips the fence open like it's cheap plastic. The guards panic and start shooting, and the bullets just stop in the air like, nah, we're good. You can almost feel how stupid they look in that moment. Then the soup squad pulls up acting all tough, like this is finally their big scene. She doesn't even react. She just lifts all of them at once and slides them off to the side like she's moving chairs out of the way. Nobody gets hurt. Nobody gets a cool moment. They're just stuck there watching her open cells and let everyone walk out. Okay, so Vought has to be absolutely losing it because this is the worst kind of disaster. And then she meets the boys, which is my favorite part. Butcher tries his usual scary speech and she shuts him down instantly. Just looks at him and basically says she knows exactly what kind of messed up dude he is. You can see it hit him that he can't bullshit his way out of this one. Butcher's standing there trying to act cool, but he knows if he steps out of line, she'll turn him into a smear without even trying. That's the moment he realizes he's not the most dangerous person in the room anymore. And honestly, watching that realization sink in is funny as hell. Executive Order 14. A arrived on desks at 0600, printed on letterhead, bearing seals that made questioning inadvisable. The language was clinical, stripped of rhetoric that might invite debate. Effective immediately. Necessary measures. Protection of critical infrastructure. Authorization to deploy all available assets in pursuit of neutralizing existential threat to national security. Nobody asked which threat the order meant. The city only had one that mattered. By 0800, the deployment was underway. Drones launched from bases in 3 states coordinated by AI that treated airspace like a chessboard requiring occupation. Military models, law enforcement surveillance units, experimental craft that shouldn't exist outside classified budgets. They converged on Washington's sky with the methodical patience of systems following directives without stopping to consider wisdom. Helicopters joined them. News crews initially drawn by the spectacle of coordinated response, then National Guard transports, then private contractors hired under emergency provisions that paid well enough to make questions feel expensive. The sky grew crowded. Soups came last, ascending in formations that had been practiced for morale rather than tactics. 47 enhanced individuals deputized under martial law, each one carrying powers that ranged from useful to theatrical. They flew in staggered layers, creating depth that cameras loved and tacticians pretended meant something. From street level, the display looked impressive, overwhelming. The kind of show of force designed to make observers feel small and protected in equal measure. Tatsumaki stood in the middle of an intersection 3 blocks from the Capitol, looking up at the machinery of authority, demonstrating its capacity for spectacle. She raised one hand. The drones stopped first, not crashed, not shot down. Their rotors simply slowed, encountering resistance that physics textbooks hadn't prepared them for. Forward momentum bled away into forces that didn't care about thrust-to-weight ratios. 300 drones hung suspended across the city's airspace, maintaining altitude through inertia alone, while their navigation systems screamed contradictory data. Then, they descended. Slowly. So slowly that pilots on the ground had time to watch feeds showing controlled drops that looked more like gentle landings than failures. The drones settled onto rooftops, streets, parks, anywhere gravity suggested, but electronics couldn't prevent. No explosions, no fires, just an aerial fleet becoming expensive debris organized in neat rows. The helicopters felt it next. Rotor wash that had been pushing air suddenly found air pushing back with opinions about proper flow patterns. Pilots fought controls that responded sluggishly, collective levers moving through invisible molasses. Altitude became negotiable. Forward flight became theoretical. Emergency protocols kicked in. Engines screamed. Pilots called Mayday with voices that stayed professionally calm, while instruments told lies about lift and drag. Tatsumaki brought them down one at a time, prioritizing occupied craft over unmanned vehicles, giving pilots time to realize they were landing whether they chose to or not. Skids touched pavement with the gentleness of someone who understood the difference between grounding aircraft and creating casualties. A news helicopter settled in the middle of the National Mall crew, emerging with cameras still rolling broadcasting footage of their own controlled descent. The pilot's hands shook on the collective that no longer controlled anything. "We're down," he said into his headset voice, carrying the shock of someone who'd just learned flight was optional. "Unknown force. All systems nominal, but unresponsive to input." Across the city, identical reports flooded emergency channels. In Vought Tower, Sage watched feeds from 17 angles simultaneously while her tablet compiled data that confirmed what observation already suggested. "She's not destroying them." The analyst beside her spoke quietly, like volume might make the problem worse. "She's just making them irrelevant." "I can see that." Sage's fingers moved across the screen, running calculations on resource deployment and return on investment. "How many aircraft did we commit to this demonstration?" 473 total, mix of military, civilian, and enhanced response. "And current operational capacity, 0. The analyst pulled up a map showing grounded vehicles distributed across Washington like pieces removed from a board. "Everything's intact. Nothing's damaged. They're just on the ground where she put them." Sage closed her eyes briefly, the expression of someone doing math she didn't enjoy. So we've just demonstrated to the entire country that our aerial superiority means nothing against someone who can decide flight doesn't work anymore. That's one interpretation. It's the only one that matters. Sage opened her eyes. Get me deployment numbers for ground assets. If she's denying us vertical space, we flood the horizontal. The Supes discovered their predicament differently than the machines. Flight for them wasn't about rotors or thrust. It was integrated into nervous systems woven through muscle memory and self-image. They didn't stop flying because equipment failed. They stopped because the air itself had developed preferences about who got to occupy it. Some hung suspended at their current altitude, unable to climb or descend, frozen in postures that would have looked dramatic if they'd been intentional. Others felt their powers sputter like engines running dry, catching and failing with rhythm that suggested someone testing limits rather than breaking them completely. A few tried to push through, activating every ounce of enhanced physiology they possessed. One Superman whose entire identity revolved around being faster than problems attempted a supersonic dive toward the intersection where Tatsumaki stood. He made it 40 feet before velocity became memory. Hung there, body still oriented downward. Expression locked somewhere between determination and dawning understanding. That force of will meant nothing against someone who decided his trajectory was complete. Tatsumaki lowered him to the roof of a nearby building, set him down with the care reserved for objects that shouldn't break, then returned her attention to the remaining aircraft, still attempting relevance. From the ridge outside the city, the boys watched through binoculars that showed them a battlefield transforming into theater. Jesus Christ. Starlight's voice carried awe and horror in equal measure. She's grounding everything. Tracked a military transport settling onto the interstate with traffic backing up for miles behind it. People are trapped. Ambulances can't move. Emergency services are paralyzed. That's not on her. Butcher lowered his binoculars, lighting a cigarette with hands that stayed steady through habit rather than calm. That's on the cunts who decided overwhelming her with hardware was a good idea. It's still happening. MM's jaw tightened. And we're just watching. What would you have us do? Ask her nicely to let the drones shoot at her. Butcher exhaled smoke. This is what escalation looks like when one side's got infinite resources and the other's got infinite patience. Eventually, the resources run out and patience wins. Starlight turned anger cutting through exhaustion. This isn't winning. This is collective punishment for decisions made by people in bunkers. Welcome to war. Butcher met her glare. The innocent always pay first. Question is whether they pay once or keep paying until someone stops the people charging them. He pulled out his phone, already composing the message he'd been drafting since Chapter 1. The one that would tell Samir to prepare the virus for deployment. That would commit them to genocide, wearing a mask of necessity. His thumb hovered over send. In the city, emergency response teams attempted coordination while their supervisors screamed into phones about jurisdiction and authorization. Ambulances sat motionless in traffic created by grounded helicopters. Fire trucks couldn't reach calls because drones blocked intersections. Police vehicles idled at checkpoints that had lost meaning when the sky stopped being enforceable. The machinery of martial law discovered it had been optimized for control, not crisis response. A medical helicopter on the roof of Georgetown University Hospital sat silent rotors still crew inside watching cardiac monitors for a patient who needed transport to Johns Hopkins that no longer seemed possible. We've got maybe 20 minutes, the paramedic said into her radio voice, flat with the professionalism of someone refusing to acknowledge impossible situations. After that, we're looking at permanent damage. All aircraft are grounded. The dispatcher's voice carried the helplessness of someone reading policy while people died. Ground transport is experiencing severe delays due to, I know what it's experiencing. The paramedic looked out at the sky that had stopped working. Just tell me if anyone's got a solution that doesn't involve praying. Silence answered her. 30 blocks south, Tatsumaki felt the shift in urgency before seeing its source. The helicopter on the hospital roof wasn't military, wasn't enforcement, just medical equipment that happened to share airspace with things trying to kill her. She tilted her head considering. Then, she carved exception into the pattern she'd established. The medical helicopter's rotors spun up, responding to controls that suddenly remembered how to translate input into motion. The crew felt lift return like someone had flipped a switch between grounded and functional. The pilot's voice shook. We've got power, full control restored. Then fly, the paramedic said, already strapping down equipment, before whatever miracle just happened decides to unhappen. They lifted off the only aircraft in Washington sky that Tatsumaki had decided could exist there. She tracked them across the city, maintaining the exception through concentration that looked effortless but required decisions happening faster than crisis. The helicopter reached Johns Hopkins, landed, transferred its patient to surgeons who had been preparing for the worst. Then it grounded again, rotors slowing as Tatsumaki rescinded permission she had never been asked for. In Vought Tower, someone replayed the footage 3 times. She let them through. The analyst's voice carried confusion rather than relief. Medical flight, non-threatening. She made an exception. Sage didn't respond immediately. She was running scenarios, updating models, recalculating threat assessments based on variables that kept introducing nuance where certainty should live. She's not indiscriminate. Sage said it like a realization that made the problem worse rather than better. She's precise, which means she's making judgments about what deserves to fly and what doesn't. Isn't that good, if she can distinguish? It means she's operating on principles we can't predict or manipulate. Sage pulled up deployment orders for the next phase, and everyone sees it for what it always was. A machine designed to protect itself, not the people it claims to serve. And the virus. Starlight's voice was quiet. When do you decide the cost is worth it? Butcher looked at his phone, at the message that would unleash genocide, at the decision he'd been preparing to make since the moment he learned Vought had weaponized humanity itself. When she's not enough, he pocketed the phone without sending. When whatever she breaks isn't enough to stop them from building it again. He turned back toward the city where Tatsumaki stood in an intersection that had become the center of forces realigning around someone who refused to acknowledge their authority. Or when she becomes the thing we need protection from. Butcher lit another cigarette. Whichever comes first. Below them, the convoys entered the city limits. Tatsumaki tracked their approach with the same clinical attention she'd shown everything else, that had tried to impose itself on spaces where people needed room to breathe. Her hand rose again. The lead vehicle's engine continued running. Its wheels, however, developed opinions about rotation that didn't align with acceleration. The convoy slowed not because drivers chose to, but because motion had become theoretical regardless of throttle input. One by one, armored transports settled into positions that formed barriers rather than threats. Troops emerged, weapons-ready, training screaming at them to respond to paralysis they couldn't fight. Nobody fired. Nobody rushed forward. They just stood there, watching a single person demonstrate that deployment meant nothing against someone who had decided deployment was optional. She's not fighting them, she's embarrassing them. And somehow that's way more brutal than ever. The lab smelled like industrial disinfectant and decisions people would regret making. Located in a basement, 3 jurisdictions away from anywhere that officially existed, it housed equipment Samir had assembled from black market purchases and careful theft. Centrifuges hummed. Refrigeration units kept samples at temperatures that made replication possible. 300 doses of soup-killing virus sat in cryogenic storage, each one capable of eradicating enhanced biology within a 50-mile radius of deployment. Butcher stood before the storage unit, hands in pockets, expression carrying the weight of someone who'd done the math and accepted the cost. Occupied the doorway, blocking exit more through presence than position. This is genocide. This is extermination. Butcher didn't turn. There's a difference. Not to the people dying. They're not people. Butcher's voice stayed flat, clinical, stripped of anything that might invite debate. They're weapons with power. Departments, lab-grown nightmares wearing capes and selling action figures. You don't negotiate with a plague. You eradicate it. Starlight entered behind exhaustion making her movements heavy. And everyone within 50 miles, the servers at restaurants, the nurses working night shifts, people just trying to survive this mess. Acceptable casualties in a war we didn't start. Butcher finally turned, meeting their stares without flinching. Vought made them soldiers whether they wanted to be or not. Compound Vive doesn't ask permission. It just turns people into liabilities waiting to explode. She's enhanced too. Said it quietly, the observation cutting deeper than shouting. Butcher's jaw tightened. Which is why we do this before she gets in the way. The room's temperature dropped before anyone felt it physically. Tatsumaki materialized in the doorway beside having entered through methods that made locked doors theoretical. She looked at the cryogenic storage, at Butcher, at the calculation in his eyes that she'd seen before in people who'd decided collateral damage was acceptable if it served a larger goal. No. Her voice carried no inflection, no invitation to negotiation. Butcher studied her, weighing options that had already narrowed to a single choice. You don't understand what's at stake. I understand exactly what's at stake. Tatsumaki stepped into the lab, small and green-haired and radiating certainty that made the room feel smaller. You're planning to kill anyone with Compound V in their system. That's not a war. That's genocide with a moral excuse. It's the only way to end this permanently. Butcher's hand moved toward his jacket pocket where a remote detonator would activate dispersal systems already in place across 3 population centers. Vought weaponized humanity. We're just responding in kind. By becoming them, Tatsumaki's eyes tracked his hand. By deciding who deserves to live based on biology, they didn't choose. They chose to keep taking V. They chose to play dress-up and pretend they were gods. They chose. Most didn't choose anything. Her voice stayed level, but the air pressure began shifting. You're going to murder children because they were born with Compound 5 in their blood. You're going to eradicate medical personnel who took V to save lives during the pandemic. You're going to kill people whose only crime was existing in a system they can't escape. Silence filled spaces between them. Sometimes, Butcher said carefully, you have to burn the field to kill the infestation. And sometimes you just like burning things. Tatsumaki tilted her head slightly, studying him the way forensic analysts studied crime scenes. You don't want to save anyone. You want revenge that feels like justice. Butcher's hand closed around the detonator. Tensed. Starlight's powers flickered involuntarily, casting shadows that danced across lab equipment. I'm going to push this button. Butcher pulled the device from his pocket thumb, resting on activation. And you're going to let me. Because deep down, you know I'm right. You know the only way to stop Vought is to eradicate what makes Vought possible. Tatsumaki raised one hand. Butcher's thumb froze millimeters from the button. His arm locked muscles straining against forces that had decided voluntary motion was complete. The detonator remained in his grip useless, while his nervous system screamed about paralysis it couldn't fight. I'm not letting you do this. Tatsumaki's tone hadn't changed, still that same flat delivery that made arguing feel pointless. Not because I think you're wrong about Vought, but because you're about to become worse than what you're fighting. Worse. Butcher's voice came out strangled, forced through lungs that barely remembered how to expand. I'm trying to save... You're trying to feel better about your wife's death by killing everyone who reminds you of what killed her. Tatsumaki stepped closer. That's not justice. That's grief wearing tactical gear. The detonator crumpled. Not violently, just compressed plastic and circuitry folding into itself until the device became a compact cube of materials that no longer served their designed function. It fell from Butcher's paralyzed hand, hitting concrete with a sound like failure achieving physical form. The pressure released. Butcher stumbled, caught himself against the storage unit, breathing hard through the aftershock of complete helplessness. You just doomed us. His voice shook with rage and something that might have been relief. You just guaranteed Vought wins. Vought was always going to win. Tatsumaki turned toward the cryogenic storage. That's what systems do. They survive, they adapt, they rebuild. Your virus wouldn't have changed that. It would have just created a power vacuum for the next monster to fill. She looked at the storage unit at 300 doses representing genocide packaged as solution. I could destroy these. Her hand hovered near the unit. Make sure nobody ever uses them. But that wouldn't solve anything either. You'd just make more. Or someone else would. The problem isn't the virus. Her hand dropped. It's the people who think problems can be solved by deciding who deserves to die. Exhaled slowly, tension bleeding out in increments. So what now? Now you choose. Tatsumaki looked at each of them in turn. Keep planning genocide and I stop you. Again, every time. Until you understand that some lines don't get crossed. And if we cross them anyway? Butcher's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd already decided consequences were acceptable. Then you find out what happens when you make me an enemy instead of an obstacle. The threat carried no heat. No anger, just statement of fact delivered with the clinical precision of someone who'd calculated outcomes and found them unpleasant but manageable. Starlight moved between them, hands raised in a gesture that felt more desperate than diplomatic. We're on the same side. We all want Vought gone. We were never on the same side. Tatsumaki cut her off without malice, just correction. You want to save people. He wants to kill people. I want to break the machinery that makes both necessary. Those aren't compatible goals. They're just temporarily aligned targets. She walked toward the exit, pausing at the doorway. The virus stays locked. You stay away from deployment, and maybe we all survive long enough to see whether breaking Vought matters more than becoming them. Tatsumaki left her footsteps fading upstairs that led back to a city still paralyzed by forces she'd imposed and systems she'd exposed. The lab fell quiet, except for the hum of refrigeration units keeping genocide frozen until someone decided thawing it seemed reasonable. Butcher picked up the crushed detonator, turning the compacted materials over in his hands. She doesn't understand. Maybe she understands better than we do. MM pushed off the doorframe, heading for the exit. Maybe that's the problem. Starlight lingered, looking between the storage unit and Butcher's white-knuckled grip on destroyed technology. If you try this again, I know. Butcher met her eyes. She'll stop me. Again, until one of us doesn't walk away. And you're still going to try. It wasn't a question. Butcher didn't answer. He didn't need to. Starlight left, following MM upstairs, that felt heavier on the descent than the climb. Alone in the basement with genocide and broken plans, Butcher pulled out his phone, scrolled through contacts until he found the entry marked simply H. His thumb hovered over call. 3 floors above, in a penthouse that overlooked a city he could no longer control, through strength alone, Homelander felt his phone vibrate. He looked at the caller ID, at the name he'd saved ironically, at the man who'd tried to kill him more times than seemed healthy. The phone rang once, twice. Homelander answered. Butcher. What a surprise. His voice carried that carefully modulated charm that hid knives. Finally calling to surrender. Calling to make a deal. Butcher's voice came through cold, stripped of everything except calculation. You want the green-haired bitch gone. I want Vought in ashes. We've got compatible short-term goals. Silence stretched across the connection. You're proposing we work together. Homelander said it slowly, tasting each word for poison. After everything. After Becca, after Soldier Boy, after you've spent years trying to prove I bleed. I'm proposing we both survive to keep hating each other. And Butcher lit a cigarette, inhaling smoke that did nothing for the taste in his mouth. She's too strong for either of us alone. But together with your powers and my willingness to do what needs doing, you want to kill her. I want her out of the way long enough to finish what we both started. Homelander looked out at Washington, at the sky he could no longer own, at the city that had stopped acknowledging his supremacy the moment someone stronger had decided supremacy was negotiable. Where and when? Butcher smiled without humor. I'll send coordinates. Come alone. No cameras. No Sage. Just you and me, and the problem we can't afford to ignore. He hung up before Homelander could respond. Set the phone down beside the crushed detonator. Stared at materials that represented 2 different kinds of genocide, both equally desperate, both predicated on the same fundamental calculation. Some problems couldn't be negotiated with. They could only be removed. Outside the lab, the city continued its paralysis. Emergency services navigating grounded aircraft. Citizens trapped between martial law and the person who decided martial law didn't work anymore. Systems grinding against realities they hadn't been designed to accommodate. And in spaces between all the locked conflicts, everyone who mattered understood what came next. Not resolution, not victory. Just the moment when people who'd run out of good options started considering the catastrophic ones. Tatsumaki felt the shift from 3 miles away. Felt Butcher's decision crystallizing into action. Felt Homelander's ego accepting alliance it would have murdered to avoid. Felt the city moving toward a conclusion that would make previous chapters look restrained by comparison. She stood on a rooftop looking out at infrastructure she'd broken, and systems she'd exposed, and people caught between forces that cared more about winning than protecting. Behind her, the city held its breath. Ahead, something worse than martial law was assembling. And between the breath and the worse, there was only the space where decisions got made that nobody could take back. She closed her eyes, opened them. The city hadn't changed, but the equation had. And mathematics didn't care about good intentions when calculating blast radius. Okay, so Chapter 7 is where Butcher fully snaps. He's straight up about to use a virus and doesn't care who gets caught in. As long as he gets his win, at that point, he's not better than the soups he hates. Then, Tatsumaki walks in and ruins everything. He's about to hit the button, and she freezes him in place, like a kid doing something stupid. No yelling, no fight, just stops him. The best part is she calls him out and says he's hiding behind his anger and grief instead of fixing himself. And you can tell that hurts way more than getting punched. Then she crushes the detonator into a useless lump of metal right in front of him, which is honestly funny as hell. I bet Butcher is just mad that she did more damage to Vought in one day than he ever did. That's why he calls Homelander at the end. Dude would rather side with his worst enemy than admit he lost. The execution was scheduled for noon. Not officially, not in documents that would survive legal challenges. But Sage had choreographed it with the precision of someone who understood that spectacle required timing as much as violence. Public square. Maximum media presence. The message clear enough that even people who didn't speak English would understand what power looked like when it stopped pretending to be gentle. Homelander arrived early, positioning himself on the steps of the Capitol building that Tatsumaki had made famous through disrespect. Behind him, contractors had erected a platform. Equipment hummed. Armed personnel formed perimeters that looked defensive but served display. Cameras assembled drawn by announcements that promised resolution to the crisis paralyzing the nation's capital. Networks interrupted programming. Social media surged. 40 million people leaning towards screens, waiting to see whether their protector could reclaim supremacy through force the green-haired threat had made seem negotiable. Homelander wore the suit, polished, pristine. Every inch of fabric calculated to remind viewers that gods didn't wrinkle. His smile carried confidence built from years of being the strongest person in every room, reinforced by Butcher's assurance that together they could accomplish what separated had failed. He scanned the crowd, the cameras, the sky where Tatsumaki would arrive. His phone buzzed. Butcher's message. She's coming. Northwest. 2 minutes. Homelander rose slightly, cape catching wind, in ways that made photographers scramble for angles. The performance was starting. Time to remind America why they'd built statues in his image. Tatsumaki descended from the north, dropping through airspace. Homelander had reclaimed, through agreement with someone who wanted her gone badly enough to betray every principle he'd claimed to stand for. She landed in the square, boots touching marble, worn smooth by speeches about freedom delivered by people who'd owned slaves. The crowd pulled back, creating space that felt more like quarantine than respect. Homelander's smile widened. There you are? His voice carried across the plaza, amplified by acoustics and ego. We've been waiting. Tatsumaki looked at him, at the cameras, at the trap that thought itself clever. This ends now. Homelander descended, boots and touching ground 3 feet from where she remained. You're going to surrender. You're going to apologize for the chaos you've caused. And you're going to leave our country before I make you a lesson about what happens when foreign threats forget their place. Around them, armed personnel tightened formation. Sniper teams acquired targeting solutions they'd practiced on hypotheticals. Sage watched from the tower tablet, tracking biometric responses from the crowd. Everything was positioned, choreographed, perfect. Tatsumaki raised one hand. Homelander froze. Not because he chose to, because the air itself became solid, wrapping around him like a fist that understood leverage better than freedom. His boots stayed rooted, his arms locked at his sides. The smile stayed fixed on his face, while his eyes began showing panic that cameras captured in high definition. Let His voice came out strained, fighting against forces that didn't care about super strength or heat vision or decades of being untouchable. "Let me." Tatsumaki lifted him. Slowly. So slowly that every camera caught the transition from grounded to helpless. Homelander rose 10 feet 20 suspended above the crowd, like evidence being held up for examination. His cape hung limp, his fists clenched uselessly, the symbol of American supremacy demonstrating exactly how much supremacy mattered against someone who decided gravity was optional. "Shoot her!" Someone screamed, the order voice cracking with the desperation of plans collapsing in real time. Rounds fired from 6 angles converging on a target that bullets had never successfully reached. They slowed 3 feet out, hung suspended like accusations waiting to be acknowledged, then fell to marble with sounds like punctuation on a sentence nobody wanted to finish. Tatsumaki rotated Homelander slowly, giving every angle access to what he'd become, a man in a costume held aloft by forces he couldn't fight, proving that gods were just people who'd gotten very good at pretending otherwise. His face cycled through expressions: rage, fear, humiliation, calculation. All of it broadcast to 40 million screens where people watched their strongest protector discover he was neither strong nor protective when someone decided demonstrations were finished. From the tower, Sage closed her eyes. "Pull all feeds." Her voice stayed level despite watching infrastructure crumble. "Cut the broadcasts. Kill the streams. Get this off." Too late. The analyst beside her gestured at monitors, showing every network, every platform, every screen in America carrying the same image Homelander suspended, powerless, the myth stripped away in high definition. Tatsumaki held him there for 30 seconds that felt eternal. Then she brought him down, setting him on the Capitol steps, with the gentleness reserved for fragile things that shouldn't break, but needed to understand they could. Homelander stumbled when released. Caught himself, straightened, with the overcorrection of someone whose body remembered how to look strong even when everything else had failed. "This," his voice shook, "this isn't over. Tatsumaki turned away from him, facing the cameras directly. She didn't speak, didn't explain, just raised her hand toward Vought Tower, visible on the horizon. The building shuddered, not collapsed, not destroyed, just compromised. Windows cracked in patterns that suggested someone had decided structural integrity was negotiable. Server rooms felt pressure mounting from directions architecture hadn't been designed to accommodate. The PR machinery that had spent decades crafting narratives discovered its equipment worked fine. But its narratives no longer survived contact with reality. In the basement levels, Compound 5 storage felt forces that made reinforced containment theoretical. Vials cracked, samples spilled. Decades of weaponized biology becoming expensive puddles that would require cleanup crews and explaining to shareholders why the product line had become contaminated. Tatsumaki lowered her hand. The tower remained damaged, but functional, stripped of the invulnerability it had projected through lawyers and marketing. She turned back to Homelander, who'd recovered enough composure to remember he had an audience. "You think breaking things makes you right?" His voice carried venom wrapped in practiced charm. "You think humiliating me changes anything? I'm still nothing." Tatsumaki's voice cut through his performance. "You're still nothing, just louder." She looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at the 40 million people watching. Someone refused to participate in the theater that made tyrants possible. Then she rose, ascending through airspace that belonged to whoever was strong enough to claim it, leaving behind a plaza full of armed personnel, a god who'd discovered he wasn't, and a city that would spend years figuring out what happened when the biggest lie got exposed on live television. Homelander watched her disappear into cloud cover, fists clenched, face locked in an expression that would become memes before sunset. Someone in the crowd started laughing, nervous, shocked. The sound of tension breaking into something that might have been relief if it didn't feel so much like falling. The laugh spread. Not everyone, not celebratory. Just the helpless sound of people watching certainties dissolve and not knowing what came next. In the tower, Sage began damage control that felt more like triage. Homelander's compromised. She said it, clinically stripping emotion from assessment. Public humiliation captured and distributed across every platform we can't suppress. We need to pivot narrative immediately. To what? The director had aged 5 years in 5 minutes. She just demonstrated he's powerless against her. What narrative makes that acceptable? None. Sage pulled up contingency plans, filed under scenarios she'd hoped to never activate. So we don't try to make it acceptable. We make it her fault. Every casualty from the infrastructure damage, every system failure, every consequence of her presence becomes ammunition. And Homelander. Sage looked at monitors showing him still positioned on the Capitol steps, staff approaching with the careful movements of people who weren't sure if he'd take humiliation out on the nearest targets. We rebuild his image. Slowly, carefully. Make him the victim of foreign aggression we couldn't predict. She paused. And we make sure the next generation of Supes understands what happens when they think strength means they don't need to be careful. Outside emergency services attempted to process what had just happened. Cameras kept rolling. Social media fractured into 1,000 interpretations of the same event. Some celebrating, some terrified, most just confused about whether they should feel safer or more vulnerable, now that the strongest person they knew had been made irrelevant on live television. The boys watched from their safe house 3 people who'd spent years trying to accomplish what someone had just done in under 5 minutes. MM turned off the monitor, unable to watch replays of Homelander, suspended like evidence. That's it. She just leaves. What did you expect? Butcher lit a cigarette, hand steady, despite watching his greatest enemy get humiliated without him. Victory lap coronation. She's not here to save us. Never was. Starlight stared at the blank screen. But Vaught's still intact. Homelander's still alive. The virus is still in storage. Nothing's actually solved. Nothing was ever going to be solved. Butcher exhaled smoke. We just watched the myth die. The system that propped it up is still there, just scrambling for new myths to sell. MM's phone buzzed. Messages flooding in from contacts across the country, all asking the same question in different words. What happens now? He didn't have an answer. Nobody did. In apartments across America, people sat in silence, processing footage that had gone viral within seconds. Homelander suspended. Powerless. The image that would define a generation's understanding that strength was contextual and supremacy was performance, until someone stronger decided performances were finished. Some cheered. Some mourned. Most just felt the ground shift underneath assumptions they'd built lives around. In a basement lab, Butcher's phone showed missed calls from Samir. The virus still existed, still waited, still represented a solution that looked more tempting every time someone remembered that breaking symbols didn't break systems. He deleted the calls without listening. Time for that later. Right now, the world was processing what happened when gods got treated like men, and everyone realized they'd been worshipping performance all along. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Tatsumaki flew toward destinations she hadn't decided on yet. The city behind her would spend years untangling what she'd broken and centuries arguing about whether breaking it had been necessary. She'd given them space to breathe. What they did with it wasn't her problem. Below, the world continued its slow collapse, rebuilt its familiar structures under new names, and prepared for the next crisis that would require someone to stand up and pretend they had solutions. The boys would keep fighting. Vought would keep rebuilding. Homelander would recover his performance or replace it with something worse. Butcher would eventually decide the virus was necessary and deploy it despite warnings and Tatsumaki's threat. The cycle would continue because cycles always did. But somewhere in the middle of it, preserved on 40 million devices and spreading through networks that couldn't be suppressed, there existed proof that the strongest person in America had been held up like a child throwing a tantrum, and everyone had seen it happen without editing or spin. That proof wouldn't save anyone. But it meant the next time Homelander threatened someone, the person being threatened might remember he'd been suspended 20 feet up by someone who hadn't bothered to announce herself or explain her intentions. They might remember that supremacy was just confidence until someone tested it. And maybe that would be enough to make the next person who grabbed for godhood think twice about whether the performance was worth the risk. Or maybe it wouldn't matter at all. Tatsumaki crossed into international airspace, leaving jurisdiction and consequence behind. The city held its breath. And somewhere in the machinery of power reasserting itself, someone started building the next lie. Because that's what systems did. They survived. They adapted. They rebuilt. And the people caught in them kept hoping the next version would be different, knowing it wouldn't be, but hoping anyway. Because hope was cheaper than revolution and safer than admitting that changing the performers didn't change the performance. The world didn't end. It just lost its favorite lie. And in the space where that lie used to live, something worse was already taking root. Guys. Now. Chapter 8 is straight up brutal. Homelander really threw himself a whole parade, smiling like he won life, and then Tatsumaki just shows up and wrecks the vibe in 2 seconds. She doesn't yell, doesn't pose, doesn't do shit. She just lifts his ass off the ground like, nah. Sit your stupid ass down, yeah? And also the way she spins him around for the cameras, that's evil. Like not even evil, just disrespectful as hell. He's up there kicking the air, trying to look tough, and everyone can see it's not working. No lasers, no threats. Just a grown man, dangling like a toy. The crowd laughing is what really kills him, though. Well, to be honest, you can feel his soul leave his body the moment people start giggling. This dude used to rule by fear, and now he's a meme in real time. Vaught's whole image just fucking collapses on the spot, and you know Sage is somewhere screaming because there is no way to spin this shit. And yeah, Butcher's probably mad he didn't get to pull the trigger, but honestly, this is way worse. Death would have been easy. This lives forever. Everyone saw it. The strongest man alive got picked up muted and embarrassed like a naughty kid. And there's no coming back from that shit. And yes, that's the end of it. See y'all in the next video.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching and we will see you next time.